welcome back, everybody, to episode 69. Unfortunately, we don't have any clever topics or even clever episode names for that to
Yeah.
commemorate this event. Instead, we just decided to push right along and talk about making characters. Specifically, this time we're going to talk about the different aspects of making your character that really matter in Camelot Unchained and how important that process is and
hmm
how that might work out a little bit or how they could make that work out. So specifically talking about your selection of race, realm, I guess I should say, realm, race, class, primary stats. We're going to talk a little bit about secondary stats and derived stats and banes and boons. So, to go right on into it, let's talk about stats. In the game, there is a whole host of different stats that they're going to have, at least according to the really old BSC video. But we assume most of these are still going to be viable and haven't been changed as far as we can tell. The primary
Yeah.
stats. I was going to list these off real quickly,
Okay.
just for those who may not be super familiar with them. The primary stats are strength, dexterity, agility, vitality, endurance, attunement, willpower, faith, resonance, and eyesight. Strength, obvious. Your carrying capacity, ability to
hmm
use heavier weapons and armor. Dexterity reduces your encumbrance penalty, allows use of medium weapons, light armor. Agility is your movement speed, usage of light weapons. Vitality is your health. Endurance, your stamina. Attunement is some ability for magic usage. Will is your control over magic usage. Faith, we don't really know. Use of
Not
magic
quite.
granted by greater powers. I'm
Well,
assuming it's your
yeah,
magic prowess for
use of
divine abilities.
magic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Resonance allows use of voice and instrument-based abilities. So again, it's a
Class
bard
specific
ability.
there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
kind of. Some of these are kind of class-specific. We're assuming.
Yeah.
Eyesight, vision range, use of targeting abilities. Then there is a list of secondary abilities that you will pick at character creation to some extent. I don't know that they ever told us how much control we'll have over these. I assume we do have some points, but what I don't know is I don't know if your choice of race automatically puts points into certain things.
It will for one of
Yeah.
these,
Yeah.
at least. Yeah.
As for
Races
instance,
are gonna have advantages and drawbacks for different stats.
that's always been my
So-
assumption, but I went looking and couldn't find anything that said that definitively or not.
Because they haven't even started implementing it, but
Yeah.
they did say that your choice of race will matter in terms of stats, and
hmm
will matter in terms of your efficiency, kind of in your design class and activities.
Thanks. And Strike was
Yeah.
agreeing that it is supposed to do
Yeah.
that and have some influence. So
For instance, the last one on this list, which you're about to go through, I'm sure mass will be affected by like Lugerpans versus giants, etc.
Mass will affect disruption.
which, as someone said, no charisma. We have a secondary stat list. Secondary stats are ones that are determined at your character creation. Unlike your primary stats, which do increase as you level, your secondary stats do not. So they are what they are when you create your character, and those are presence, which includes NPC reactions as well as certain abilities. Clarity, which reduces the effects of panic. Hearing, increases your detection ability, and mass, which is your ability to push and physically interact with people and interrupt them and knock them down and things of that nature. Then third, we have a list of derived stats. These are things that are created as a product of both your primary and secondary stats, and those include health, stamina, movement speed, vision, detection, encumbrance, carrying capacity, and your panic rating. So, with that all listed out, as you said, there are some things like Lutrapan I can't imagine are going to have a very high mass. That would be weird.
Nope. Yeah.
So I did assume, that's going to impact things a little bit.
Yeah,
And yes,
absolutely.
cat. It's gonna be a lot of all those are not gonna be. Not gonna have to track all those all through your character's life, but all those are gonna have an impact. So I expect
Mhm.
character creation to take quite a while because you're gonna have to determine how you want to play your character before even creating it.
Hmm.
And after creating it, some of them are going to change on use, um, at least for the primaries. The secondaries and the derived ones, not so much, since those depend on the primaries. But the primary ones, depending on what you use, for example, probably I expect if your strength at character creation is not huge, it might increase if you use heavy weapons all through your character's life. It's going to increase your strength by using it.
Yeah.
Hopefully, at least.
Your leveling for your character is primarily just the
Yeah.
increasing of your primary stats,
Hmm.
which,
Yeah.
Hmm.
as opposed to adding to things like damage, really just enables you to use better gear. By
Right.
it's a gating mechanic. So increasing your strength allows you to use heavier armor. Increasing your dexterity allow you to use better medium gear.
Exactly.
And so, and also as a part of leveling will be getting better options or varied options for abilities, which we're not really getting into here because we've already done an episode about leveling and
Yeah.
progression. Um,
When it comes to the derived stats, I actually look at those more as output functions rather than
yeah,
stats to worry about. They're more of on the UI for you, your health bar, your stamina bar, how fast you're moving is a visual thing you're looking at. Your ability to detect things just kind of happens around you. So you're not really worrying too much about the exact numbers of those. They're just going to start happening around you.
yeah. I actually think that really the derived stats are just the method for tracking your development,
Yeah.
Yeah.
we have those in every game. They're just being kind of singled out and isolated here and identified in that way. But every game has those. I
They're
mean,
not shown. Yeah.
WoW has hit points. Well, some of them are shown.
Yeah.
Health is a derived
Yeah.
stat, so
Hmm.
you increase your endurance and you gain hit points.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Or
it kind of is a thing
yeah.
we're already accustomed to. It's just being very hierarchically spelled out here. And in many games, they don't tell you how those things work or how they're derived
No.
exactly.
Hmm.
Whereas in this game, given that choices matter, and once you create some of these
Mm.
things, you're kind of stuck with it. It's important
Yep.
for them to explain some of these things and for people to be able to see what's going to happen.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting to see. We're going to see they. The thing about the character creation being like that for me is also the fact that, as Grimslag is saying, the min maxers, there's going to be at least a revolving meta in terms of races and classes, but hopefully there's going to be enough diversity in the effect of all those stats to make it so that it's not always one race, one class that is
Yeah.
the optimal one.
Yeah. And whereas, if, for instance, Lutrapan is going to have, I would assume, a lower mass. But I
Yeah.
would still like to see it so that a Lutrapan can increase their mass sufficiently that they can tackle a mage. Maybe not everyone. They maybe won't be
Mm,
able to knock back
yeah.
another heavy fighter or something. But maybe a Lutrapan heavy fighter can at least knock back a mage because that's what he's built
No.
for. Uh,
No.
Uh,
I
I
wouldn't
think
want that.
that might come in with armor. If armor has a mass stat associated
Yeah,
with
but
it,
then
a
your
Lucre Band could stack
encumbrance
up.
comes
Yeah,
into account.
but you start playing around with how
Yeah.
you interact with those stats and where you sacrifice and where you gain.
You
well,
might
that's
compensate. Yeah, you might compensate with a higher strength and stamina, allowing you to have a higher carrying capacity, equipping heavier armor and giving you more mass. Maybe.
yeah. Because
Yeah.
the way I look at it is, if they wanted to make it so that Lutrapan were so penalized in mass because of their small stature that they couldn't knock back anybody because of that. Then by that logical logical conclusion from that, they shouldn't be able to do half the abilities of a heavy fighter anyway. They shouldn't be able to wear heavy armor.
I agree.
They shouldn't be able to use a big shield. They shouldn't be able to do half the
But
things
I would be okay
that
with
they're
that.
going to be able to do anyway.
I would be okay with that.
It's just not happening though.
Yeah, I don't want them to class limit
I
them
don't
from
want
being able to be heavy
for
fighters.
me, a Lutrapan shouldn't be able to stagger anybody. They would be faster, more agile, yes, but they shouldn't have the mass unless
I
they've
disagree
trained
because I think
a
it's a
long
lot more
time
important
and
how you
taken
hit
the
someone.
penalty for carrying and wearing heavy armor, which means they're slower, less agile, and their targets basically.
That's
Then
assuming they're putting mass as an armor element, attaching that value to armor.
Yeah.
Which I believe they've mentioned before.
I want to say yes.
I want to say
if they
they've mentioned
don't,
that.
it's pure racial at that point, and the Lutrapan will never be able to push its
Which
way
would be-
through,
which
say,
would be very
a line
weird.
of golems.
Well, and that's the thing. I don't, and like I was saying, I don't necessarily think that. I would like to see something where like a Lutrapan's penalty to mass is such that they're almost never going to be able to stack. They're never going to be able to stack enough mass to push past another heavy fighter. Because the other heavy fighter's got like 6 feet on him. That's ridiculous. But if it's a squishy mage who's wearing cloth armor, you know, if he focused on that and heavy armor and everything, I'd like to be able to see a Lutrapan.
You have a golem mage,
knock him
even wearing cloth, shouldn't be staggered by a Lutrapan.
Only if they build mass. If they completely neglect mass, then they're a very lithe and not very heavy golem.
I don't know. For me, mass should be more race dependent than stat dependent.
Strike, while I agree that strength is not mass, you can't build strength without building mass.
If we're being real.
If we're being real.
Obviously,
it's a fantasy game, and obviously not everything's going to be realistic, but I like things to make as much sense as they can within reason. And most of what we say is largely speculation anyway, so I got to at least follow logic.
Yeah.
If the Lutrapan had enough mass to push through all of that, I'd also then just start attaching panic rating to it, because that would be scary as crap.
Well, and what I was getting with, what I was trying to get to is, pushing somebody back is also a matter of leverage and direction of force as much as it is simply your weight. So depending on how you use your mass is equally important to having the mass in the first place.
Speed times mass, right?
Mm-hmm. I'm okay with the Lutrapan staggering anybody as long as they're in a ball, in heavy armor, and thrown down a hill.
I mean, I think
Ball.
ultimately what it comes down to is, and kind of the point of this is, what I would like to see is, I don't want to see a great many of the racial features completely negating a class's functionality, or an aspect of a class's functionality in any way. I don't mind it being inferior. You know, if you make a Lutrapan heavy fighter, you know that you're never going to be great at knocking people down in general. But maybe the 25% of lightest massed characters in the games, you should probably still be able to knock them back to some degree. But of course, we know this is on a gradation as well. Like, your mass determines, I believe, how far they go back as well. So it's not just a matter of being able to knock them back, but then how far do you actually knock them back? Do you only knock them back a couple of feet? Do you actually send them flying back like 8 feet down a hill? Lutrapan's probably not going to be sending them, you know, all the way off the wall.
Yeah. I think not preventing the ability to try to do something is a good thing, but giving all of the races a strength to their size and whatever they're about. You know, to give them a specialization, but still not prevent other races from trying to do something close to that.
We come back to the choice matters philosophy,
Mm-hmm.
which is if you choose to play a Lutrapan, you should do that knowing your mass is never going to equate anybody else's, and you're going to be at a strong disadvantage if you want to try to stagger anybody, because you're a small race.
There will be sacrifices made to try to achieve that.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
exactly.
That's kind of what I'm getting at. Is I just want it to be. If somebody wanted to make that decision, like I want a super buff for a Lutrapan with heavy armor, and I want to be able to run up to a really squishy sturm
Yeah.
mage and smack him around a little bit. It's that they'll know that they're never going to be as good at doing that as somebody else is. But they at least have the option to go, well, you're spending points in it, so you can do it, but you're kind of nerfing yourself. Because one thing I do think is important is with this whole system, they're enabling min maxers to a large extent, which is important and great for making the game enjoyable. But a different aspect of making the game fun is being able to do fun things with your characters that may not be optimal.
Right.
And if they penalize things too much in different ways, then you actually limit people's choices. Because there are some times when people may want to do something that's not optimal, but they just enjoy doing it.
And I've asked that question before on a stream with Mark about that level of choice, and if there is going to be more of a min-max system where there's very clearly this is the only way you should be going if you want maximum efficiency for what you're doing. And that might still end up being a thing, but he has also said, even if that is a thing, you can still choose to do whatever you want. If you don't want to do the most efficient thing, you have the choice to do other things.
Yeah, but that is contingent on how badly they nerf certain things.
Yeah,
right.
Even if you want to do that thing that's kind of fun, if it's not feasible at all, then you're like, okay, then why am I? It's not going to be fun because I'm going to get out there and be like, haha, I'm a little dense Lutrapan knocking people down, and they go, nope.
And I'm okay with min-maxing as long as it's not the only option. Min-maxing, like, you want to min-max as a glass cannon, that's fine. Mm-hmm. You want to min-max as a heavy fighter, that's fine. But there should be a middle ground that is as competitive as the min-maxers.
Well, what I think...
Not in their category, but they're able to compete and not gimp themselves by being less specialized.
One of the things I like the most about the RVR of this game is that it's focused on RVR. It's focused on group versus group. Not I can have 2 or 3 min-max people in my group, but myself and or somebody else doesn't, we want to take a few quirky things that aren't min-maxed. It shouldn't matter because I'm very rarely going to be one-on-one fighting somebody else. That's not what the game's focused on. I don't think that's what the game should balance itself on at all. It should be focusing its balance on what happens when a group of 8 people start shooting at a group of 8 people or swinging at a group of 8 people, and how long does it take them to kill each other. The only extent I think they should worry about 1v1 is time to kill.
Yeah. Well, even
in my opinion, the min-max game is usually more about personal skill than it is about group dynamic. That's not to say that there isn't a best case scenario for every class this is the best group balance for your class in an 8-man setting. But most min-maxers look at it, this is the best flavor of the month build for this class based off of the 1v1 kind of thing. And they start changing to that rather than thinking about the larger group.
And that's the thing you're not really going to be able to do in this game at all, which I do also like, is flavor of the month won't be a thing because it will take time to build up your character, and once you build it up, you can't immediately respec to something else.
Right.
We've talked about progression and how it seems likely that they might want to have some way to respec in the game to some limited extent, especially since, as we said, choices matter, and you make your character, and once you make it, you're kind of SOL. But we know they're going to have to balance things. So either when they nerf abilities or something, they have to be like, all right, everybody can respec for like the next month or something once, everyone of this class or something. Or, maybe have something where, okay, you can respec certain things once a year. Or, I feel like they'll have to do some limited fashion of it, but it won't be they shouldn't do it enough to where people can go, oh, this build is now awesome, so I want to do that thing.
Strike says, speaking of min-maxing and character creation, how will they help new players who have no clue what skills are good? How will they help them get through making those choices either via like a full respec, possibly
Well,
even
the
free.
skills that first, I'm very much of a proponent of informing yourself before you create a character.
People should
First.
research.
They
Yep.
won't. They
Especially,
That
should.
they won't. They
especially
should, but they won't.
yeah, but especially with a as deep as this one is going to be for the character creation system,
I do.
they should be researching that.
I do
There
think
should be
there's a few
tutorials,
things
kind
that
of.
they can
Yeah.
do. One of the ones that they can do is taking a note from like Dungeons and Dragons tabletop, and have when you select your class, there is a quick build template that basically just goes, these are your recommended distribution of stats
Sure.
and
That could
abilities.
be
We're not saying you have to pick this, but if you want to
right.
be like the standard archer of Arthurian archer, this is what we recommend. Now you can do whatever
Right.
you want from here.
If I recall, the scenarios, while I keep saying they're eventually going to make their way in the game some way, I believe they are now intended as a tutorial type of thing, and you can use. If not, you can certainly do that and use them as a get into a 15-minute long scenario with some UI elements telling you what this does and vice versa. You play the game for 15 minutes and it walks you through a little bit of it.
I'm actually, I actually have another recommendation that goes completely against what Grimslag just said in chat. He was saying that I like that we are not going to absolutely know the long-term progression effects of our
I like
initial
that.
stat selection combined decisions, and I can agree to that to some degree. But one of the things I was thinking of to help with this that they could do, and I actually kind of would like to see them do because it would be a thing that most MMOs have not done, and that is they need to have in your initial character creation. I would actually like to see a character builder, an ability builder and everything, or maybe not a full ability builder, but like a character builder. Like we see on many MMO websites, we know that someone is going to make one anyway. So they could just make one and put it in the game and have it available both in game and out of game. So you can go in there and go, okay, I want to make a Sturm heavy fighter. This is what my initial stat options are. This is what I can pick.
A build creator, basically.
A build creator, yes, exactly. And
from level 1 to max level.
Yes, and allow you to level it up, allow you to maybe level up some basic types of gear so that you could go, okay, this would be like this type of gear and yada, 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 and what it would look like. And it just, instead of necessarily, I still like the idea of them giving us the formulas for calculating everything, but then they wouldn't even necessarily have to do that so much as they could just tell us what the output is. If you do this at this stats, you have this much HP, this much endurance, this much stamina, I should say. You can wield this type of sword, which will do generally this base level of damage, yada, yada, yada. And then you can just look at that and go, okay, well, what if I did this? Click, click. All right, what about this? Click, click. What about this? Click, click.
Yeah. It's super helpful, and I'm kind of torn between both that and what Grimslag was saying. I like the idea of there being things that you don't know, like weapons, the requirements for certain weapons and armors that are hidden until you've found them or unlocked them or someone has in the world.
Well, they wouldn't have to tell us that and that sort of thing.
So I kind of hope initially there's that hidden element of things where no one has found through data mining the game what these are and what requires them.
Yeah, it's just I feel like that every MMO now has a character builder, so they could just put one in character creation and then have like quick build templates where you click it and it goes, this is our recommended stuff for this class. Or even when you load it in there, it just loads it and goes, this is our recommendation. Now you can hit cancel and it just removes all this and do whatever you want, or you can edit it from this point. But we recommend you start here, but you are free to do whatever the hell you want and mess it up. But you be warned, there is no respecking. Or you're stuck with what you make.
There is respecking by spending time building your skills in a different way.
Yeah. If you realize early enough that you made a poor choice, you have at least the luxury of starting over and not having wasted too much time.
I also think that one thing they could do is have the stats that show up change based on your class. So, for instance, if I'm doing a heavy fighter, the magic stats mean nothing to me, so they shouldn't even show up on the sheet.
Mm.
They do nothing for me. They literally do nothing, as far as I know.
Honestly, and we can talk about this. I think that's how it is right now in the betas. Is depending on what class you change, some of the stats are actually grayed out for you at the moment, and it changes depending on the class.
I hadn't noticed that, but yeah. I mean, that would be one way to simplify it at least. So then they can go, okay, I don't need those. And I would like I was saying, I would say just remove them, just make them disappear completely from the screen.
You can also go the D&D way. At least the games that are derived from D&D or like Pathfinder, where you create your character, you have your preferred skills and stats, where they tell you this is going to be more impactful for the class you're choosing. This is going to be more impactful. This is useless
recommended
for you.
Stats.
Yeah, recommended and useless stats, basically.
Yeah. I think that would be good, is to have at least a initial recommendation, and then maybe like a little blurb about the class that says this is generally what's best for this class. Feel free to experiment, but
yeah, they should definitely put a link in the UI somewhere in character building saying for a more in-depth kind of guide on what to do. If you're looking for it, this will take you to our official wiki or something where it talks more about this stuff.
Yeah, there should be like a link. If you click on the class name, it takes you. They were talking about the living encyclopedia.
Right.
It should be taking you to that.
It would be nice to have that as well. At the very least, we know that players are going to make sites. So the people that want to are going to do their research ahead of time.
And there's going to be an API, at least part of the API available for external website. So people are going to make probably character builder.
I can't really agree with that, Grimslag. I think some of the stats are going to be useless for different classes. Because like the magic stats, again, as a heavy fighter, I can't see what they're going to do for me. I can't cast spells. And
magic resistance, yes, but magic casting,
maybe. But if it has something to do with magic resistance, but then there's 3 different categories of magic ability stats: one for presence-like abilities, one for or auditory abilities, one for divine, and one for there's 2, and then there's willpower. So,
I mean, resonance is clearly a bard only. From what we know, based off of the classes, is a bard-only skill. No one else uses voice and instrument abilities. That is the support skill. A heavy fighter is going to have no use for that.
Oh, I do think they listed something for the TDD heavy fighter, maybe that has, or maybe it was the Viking that has like a battle cry or something.
Possibly. I don't know if that would use that stat specifically.
I would hope not, because it would be really weird to put points in a stat for like 2 abilities.
Right. Of
course, we don't know how many they might have,
Yeah, that too.
That's what I'm saying, Trevor. The shouting abilities are, I guess that's true. There is now this wasn't in the initial character release when they did all the characters. There are now a shouting category of abilities for all classes, more or less. You have the option in the ability builder to kind of choose a shout as the main category. So it might become more utilized now than it used to be when this was made. This is a BSC doc, so.
But that might also be for heavy fighters. They might decide, okay, that actually doesn't link to that stat because it's not magic. Yeah. Instead, it's instead it's from presence and something and strength or something else that just
that could be also a thing.
We have no idea how they would do it, but that would be something else they'd have to specify in there. So they would have to have. When you go to select your class, they would have to have some things about your abilities. I mean, they could do it the old school way, where you just have to go look up every ability and all your different stats and how they intertwine and things and what the formulas are. But it's honestly going to be really, it's going to lead to a whole lot of complaining. And it's really, as much as this game is supposed to be old school in several ways and cater to old school MMO players in some ways, I think that would really push away a lot of newer MMO players from even getting past character creation. They'd go in there and just be like, what is all this crap? I don't know. I do think they need to modernize that experience some.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Um, I know we're not talking about abilities here, but going back to what Trevel was just saying, what I just mentioned, knowing that some of the abilities do utilize some of these things a little more than they initially let on, knowing those stats will be important. And I'm asking Strike in chat because he kind of had an answer a while back on how many component variances per class there are. And you might even need to know a lot of the ability components going ahead of time to see what stats you're going to have to pick that'll be most utilized for your larger group of components.
The thing is, since you're creating the abilities yourself, you can also customize them to fit your character build, rather than in classic MMOs where they're already predetermined.
Sure. The components, though, kind of decide what type of style of combat you fall into. So you'll have to look at those and know those in advance. If you are more of a, a lot of people say I'm more of a ranged magic user, or I'm more of a melee rogue or fighter type class. You'll have to know what your components are, and then look at the stats accordingly to figure out where you should best put those.
Yeah, and that's why, like, with the idea I suggested of having like a character builder, essentially, when you're building your character, there's a literal character builder there to test things out. I don't think they would need to put in like the full ability builder system into that process, but instead would at least need to give some template examples, like, okay, these are some abilities you will have access to, and then at each, depending on when you change things, it would show, okay, well, this is now doing this much damage versus when it was doing this much damage, or this is the effect this is having now. At a base level anyway, because obviously resistances and things will come into play, but they can't work that in there. There's no way. So another one of the things, let's see. Yeah, they have mentioned the tutorial scenarios, but I actually had thought that the tutorial scenarios were going to be a post-character creation thing. That was going to be more of a, once you get in game, this is a tutorial for RVR type deal.
Yeah.
That could be.
At least that's last info we have. That's what should have been. Yeah.
That was the impression I got for the scenarios.
I could see it would be interesting, maybe, and you guys can obviously explain what you think and feel. If they allowed you, when you chose a class before you put stats in, to do like an end game, quote unquote, test, like the scenario was just all new players at kind of a max-ish level to kind of get a feel for how it worked, and then you go back.
The problem with that is it would be okay for a game that has a linear progression. Giving you a end game character when you don't know because normally, at least that's what it's supposed to be, the decisions you've made along the way as you level up your skills are going to affect the way your character is at end game. You can't have one single way of doing it. So it would be basically allowing you to go through the whole process of leveling your character before you even start playing.
Trevio does have an interesting suggestion, actually, allowing them to do that initial tutorial scenarios, and then if they don't like their character, they can just remake. I mean, they could allow them to respec. Honestly, you could just let them go, okay, I'm creating a new character at this point.
Going back to,
but allowing people to re-choose their abilities or something at the end of that would be probably
you could just
feasible.
go like you do the tutorial and you got confirm or respec, and that's it.
Yeah, I don't think there's a way that they can force getting people to learn and know. So that would just be an option that exists, that is there to be like, are you sure this is what you want? This is your final chance to say yes or no before you get into the game, and then people can say no.
My only issue with using the tutorial in that fashion is if it's a tutorial scenario where you're fighting against other people, that's going to work great in the first couple months of the game. But then after 6 months into the game, once most people have their characters made, who are they going to be fighting against? Unless it's NPCs, but, I had assumed they were going to be like PvP tutorials. Now, one major aspect of this that we haven't talked about yet are Banes and Boons, which, of course, are
Probably
another
bigger
huge area of character
bigger
customization.
area.
Yes.
Yeah.
That, again, could be somewhat remedied by like a character builder type thing, but
Mm.
it's, this is something that's going to change things rather dramatically if they follow the same model we've been seeing in beta, where some of these effects are pretty significant. We're not talking about a 1 or 2% increase.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're talking about
Well,
10
there
and
are
15%.
incremental ones. There are incremental ones, and then
Yeah.
there's the massive ones that change in one choice.
Well, and especially because a lot of these aren't things that necessarily are straightforward. They're not things
Yeah.
where you can necessarily go, okay, you're always doing 5% more damage, as much as it is you're doing that damage in a specific situation, and a lot of them are penalties that are going to decrease different aspects of your
Oh
character
yeah.
and reduce your armor,
Right.
your armor to some degree, or increase your penetration.
Increase the damage the damage type you take.
And that's a little bit harder, I think, to demonstrate.
Yeah. Those are very permanent, from our understanding, very permanent choices.
Yeah.
When you talk about a respec, I don't think that will include Banes and Boons. It might, but those are at the moment very permanent. So when you choose to take 10% more damage from a specific source of damage, that'll carry with you, and you will always be weak against that type of damage.
The big difference between Banes and Boons and stats is that Banes and Boons are straightforward, as we said. So it clearly says in the name and in the description what they are and what they're gonna do.
That's true.
So
very straightforward.
It's not like it's gonna increase. As far as I remember, they might be subject to change, but as far as I remember, they don't affect your stats. They affect the way your character reacts and the damage it does. So it's increasing certain type of damage or more proficiency with a certain type of weapon, taking more slashing or piercing damage. So those are straightforward. So I don't see a reason to allow respec once you've chosen those one, unless you decide you want to completely change the way your character works. And at this point, you just need to make a new character.
Yeah. Ultimately, I think I do actually kind of agree with one of the suggestions a little bit Travail made, which is I don't know this is exactly what he was going for, but it would be interesting if when you log into the game before you create a character, you had an option to play through some sort of an actual tutorial. Not for character creation, but like a little mini tutorial where you could go in there and pick a character class and then just play around with it in like basically like a little workshop mode. You could just log in with some NPCs or something like dummy style and go, okay, how does the heavy fighter play? And it would just give you a templated heavy fighter with abilities, and you could walk around and smash them and go, okay, is this fun or is this stupid? Same thing with an archer, because you won't actually know when you first time you go in the game, you won't know how that stuff works until you until you get into the game, and more so into the game, but actually progressed. And so they could actually give you like a higher level little template thing that you could fool around with for a few minutes just to see, okay, am I doing like AoE abilities? How long does it take me to cast Fireball? Can I move while I do it? Oh, no. Because, I mean, there's been so many times I've gotten into a character in an MMO, gotten to level 10, and then been like, I didn't think it would bother me, but I really hate not being able to move while I use these abilities. It is so stupid. And now I have to scrap all of that. Except in this game, who knows how long it's going to take you to realize, oh, I don't ever get any of the abilities that I really would like to have, because it takes me 2 months to unlock the new abilities, and they don't work how I thought they would.
Yeah, that's a possibility. But the problem is that's not something that's going to be in at launch anyway, because it would require a lot more development time.
Maybe.
I don't know, Brand. What do you
It's
think?
essentially just letting someone log in solo into a scenario and punch some dummies.
Yeah, I don't see why that couldn't be a thing.
Mm.
I don't think they'll invest too much time into making something specific for that,
Mm.
to try to handhold people in choosing their characters. Though I'm sure they will do something, but
I would expect, and I think what could be nice is once you choose your race and your class, it gives you a pre-built stat distribution basically,
Yeah, I
and
think
then you can fine tune it.
yeah,
at a minimum, having a
Yeah,
recommended template to go, okay,
exactly.
this is what we
Or
suggest.
it already allocates the points, and then you have the option to fine tune it basically. Remove some points from there and add them to the other stats or things like that.
yeah. Going back to Banes and Boons, those I think choices they're permanent, but they're also more of the larger picture choices, like looking at class versus class or group versus group fights, and what sources of damage you want to choose to be better at and weaker against, depending on your playstyle.
Yeah, the Banes and Boons for me are the specialization kind of option to your character. It's really the fine tuning of the way you want to play your character.
Yeah.
Like, for example, I remember some of the Banes and Boons that were there that are not there anymore, but we don't know if they might be again. When we had the Kaichi that were still in there, where you could do more damage with your claws, but then you would take more fear from fire to compensate or things like that. So it really, some of them, and I'm sad Sacrex is not in chat because some of them are more role play oriented. Because a furry character being afraid of fire is not a bad thing. I think it's some of the choice I've seen would be very well aligned with a character you do more for roleplay reason. Some of the Banes and Boon being taken for roleplay reason
But
rather
they
than the
are
mastery
generally
reasons.
very significant changes.
Yes.
So they could be taken for RP reasons, but they are very significant changes, either benefits or penalties. And when you build these Banes and Boons, you do have to select an equal number of
Right.
Banes to your Boons. And you, currently at
Well,
least,
not
you
an
have
equal
to
number of Banes boons, but
points
a
worth
point
of.
value. Yeah.
Because each Bane and Boon has a different point value. And currently, you actually have to pick a certain number of Banes and Boons. You can't just forego them and go, I'm not picking anything. You currently, in the test, you do have to pick something, which I assume is probably intended to stay, but they may not be. I don't know if that's intended to be that way at launch. But I think it's important to note that you do have to pick these Banes, and that's where people are, because who has problems picking Boons? Oh, I pick extra benefits for my character, cool, but you have to pick some penalties to go with that, and that's where I think the decision making problems will come into play. And oh god, do I really want to take a 5% vulnerability to fire?
Right. Without question, I
And
will take a 5% increase to this, but then when you say I lose 5% of something, it's like, no, let's not.
Yeah, I'd really rather not lose 1% of my movement
yeah,
speed.
yeah, no. But at the same time, if you gain on the other side significant advantage from
Yeah.
on another part of it just changes the way you play your character.
Yeah, there's definitely reasons.
It's very much flavoring, significant one, because flavoring has a connotation of it's not important, but it's very much a flavoring and a change of the way you play your character. And two characters with the same stats, the Banes and Boons could dramatically change the way they're played,
I think they
even if they
will.
have exactly the same stats.
And it may end up being, it can also affect battles significantly, because there are some that are straight up like plus 10% fire damage. And then if you're fighting against someone who has stacked a bunch of fire resistance, you actually have just put yourself at a possibly a significant disadvantage against them, because
Right.
now you're going to be doing all this fire damage that they're heavily resistant to, and you've had to take banes on yourself to get that 10% fire boost.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
now you're never going to easily beat that person in one-on-one combat, because they're just
But
like
that's the beauty of it is
Ruby armor all day.
if they make the boons attractive enough, it means you're going to be willing to take the hit of the banes to get that boon, but that's gonna change completely the way you're gonna have to play.
Right. And given that everyone can do things so differently with Banes and Boons, you don't know when you're going up against someone who has this resistance or doesn't have this resistance. So really, you're picking choices based off of your own personal playstyle and what you want to do without really factoring in too much of other players and what's going to happen, because you can't. It's just going to be so random who you go up against and what they have on their end. So you have to focus in. I want to be like a heavy fighter who is up close using a sword and does just a lot of slashing and crushing damage. I want to do lots of interrupt. So you take all the crushing boons and then pick, okay, well, if I'm up close in front, what do I want to be weak to? That won't really screw me.
It's not a
by being
character
there.
creation, but I like Strike's idea of gaining banes and boons as you play the game.
I like
some milestones.
I would like the idea of those, so long as they are much weaker.
Yeah, of course.
Like if you can get like something that gives you a very minuscule little benefit or something, or not minuscule, but I don't want to see them unlocking things that give you the 10% bonus, so much more so for flair and some minor tweaks. But of course, then you run into kind of the same problem they had in Star Wars: The Old Republic, where they made the system of holocrons and things that you had to collect, and you'd get bonuses. And then it kind of turned into a point where like no one wanted to get them all because the bonuses were really poor. And you were like, I've got to go walk all over the planet and climb stuff. I can't be bothered to do that.
It would work the same way. If you gain a boon from a milestone, you also gain the associated bane to it.
I'm not.
It keeps offsetting itself, basically.
The reward idea of that is fun, but it actually presents a balance issue.
I completely agree.
To have to go do those things, and if those milestones or quest lines are much further in the game, you're basically rewarding longer term players and creating a disadvantage there.
And they do want a more horizontal progression system.
Say for example, like the first as an Arthurian. The first time you hit 100 kill for, say, Vikings or TDD, the first time, one of them, it has to be one of them, and it expands it as you do. But on your 100th kill, the first faction you get 100 kill with, you get a bonus damage to this realm.
Temporarily, I can see a temporary boost.
You get a damage decrease for the other realm.
I could see a thing like that is more temporary, that has milestones, gives you a buff for a couple hours.
I think I'd still rather see something like titles for that, honestly.
Yeah.
Where you just have some kind of bragging rights titles or things, or realm rewards. You get more realm acknowledgement for having hit that sort of achievement. Adding the factors to different ability scores and stuff just it does add some complication to the entire game.
Also, I'm gonna play Kriss, and I'm gonna go back to the question of Bad Lunar about what in your idea, because we haven't talked about it. What would be your idea of character creation for a crafter?
What choices matter for a crafter?
Yeah, exactly.
Fair question.
What stats work for that better
that's
than...
gonna be a completely different experience.
Agility, maybe.
Strength.
And how would they display that?
Impacting the kind of metals you can actually work with.
And even more importantly, like if they had like a character builder to help display what the impact of leveling
Mm.
your character is, how would that
Oh
even
yeah,
work for a crafter? When you don't,
yeah,
I mean, you have abilities, they can still show you what the impact is on those abilities. Um, I guess the real question is how much, and this would actually be an interesting question because I don't know if this has ever been asked on one of the Friday Q&As. It probably has,
nope.
but I don't know. How much do stats matter for crafters?
Yeah.
I have no
Well,
idea what the answer to that question
running
is.
speed,
Well,
running speed.
I mean,
they,
outside of combat, like for the actual
yeah,
crafting
yeah,
process, how much do stats actually matter?
Yeah,
because there will be crafters who are okay with going into the fight and
Hmm.
oh yeah,
carrying siege weapons and building traps and doing all these
Mhm.
things for the other players. A lot of crafters we have actually talked to are like, I just want to craft. I
Yeah.
just want to make
Yeah.
stuff.
I don't want to go.
Will they even need to increase their strength and dexterity? And I mean, I
That,
assume to some extent, but how does that work?
yeah,
And then
because we don't know.
how does that? How do you show that on the character creator?
Yeah, because so far all of the versions of the character creation we've seen are for combatants,
Hmm.
not for crafters. So we have zero idea of what's going to impact a crafter's abilities because we don't even have an example of what the crafter abilities are.
That's true. Um,
Well, I mean, I'm sure they won't have the same type of banes and boons either.
Oh
So far,
yeah,
all of the beta classes have a very similar structure to their banes and boons,
yeah,
plus this
yeah,
type of
because they're all
damage,
combatants.
minus damage against this type.
Mm.
Um, will that still be a thing? Considering crafters will have the option to go
Well,
into combat.
I have several ideas for crafting itself. Like the way you operate your Vox, having boons, like you use less energy, but you have less stable Vox crystals, or decreasing the time it take to make items, but capping the quality at which you make your items, and things like that.
yeah, Grimslag asked a good question. Do we think some players will be specking characters specifically for fighting in one particular realm over the other enemy realms?
Yes, is the
Yes,
answer.
yes,
Especially once they
definitely.
know their server and you know
Yeah,
what realms are tough.
Until you learn like who the consistent better players are of the realm, and
Mm.
and if you ever learn what they've spec'd into, banes and boons wise,
Yeah,
you're probably going to do a broad. I'm fighting the Arthurians today, so I'm going to put
yeah,
on this
more
armor
Swiss
versus
Army knife.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then once you start going against the same people consistently, you can really kind of fine tune that a little bit to see what
Yeah,
they're doing.
I think largely at character creation, I think people will, but it'll be more minor because you
Mm.
won't want to completely just nerf yourself against like the TDD in order to fight the Vikings better. But you might give yourself some bonuses, like okay, I really want to be to kill the Vikings because I know they've got some big guilds on here. So you can kind of do. I think people will probably focus on some minor things for that, but then what they'll do is have interchangeable gear. So when you know you're going to fight Vikings, you can throw on some frost resistant gear
yeah,
as like a heavy fighter or something, and then march out from that because you've already got it built. You know it's coming, and you're expecting it. And then if you happen to get attacked by TDD while you're expecting to fight Vikings, you're kind of screwed. But I think people will definitely customize that a lot in their gear selection, and that'll just make more product for crafters because the people will have
Hmm.
multiple sets of gear for different situations. Um,
yeah.
but I think
And
it will happen
And
a little
I,
bit in
I
character
expect
creation.
I expect this to be the norm, where you have your Viking fighting set and your TDD fighting set,
Hmm.
and your maybe your fire resistance and your frost resistance, or whatever it's going to be. But I expect people are going to have more specialized, if not full sets, at least pieces of equipment.
Hmm.
yeah, I could also see people doing like just a universal as far as like specking goes, not counting interchangeable elements like gear.
Hmm. Yeah,
Trying just an even spread. I'm willing to take a reduction to this damage, which is a more of a physical source of damage, and the reduction to magic. to do all of this other stuff.
I think at launch that's going to be the case.
Yeah.
Until somebody is willing to sacrifice the time and the character creation to test the more extreme like stat spreads and banes and boons. People are going to go for the more moderate ones, the safer options.
Whatever gets applied the most in combat.
Yeah.
Now, I have one other question about boons and banes, and this is kind of my last question I have for today. And that is, what we've seen so far in testing is that there's a definite theme to each realm's banes and boons to some extent. For instance, in the Arthurian the Arthurian options we've seen that they've shown before for like mages and stuff tend to, as I recall anyway, and because this kind of heralds back to some of the older banes and boons they've shown, I believe. Definitely seems to emphasize fire. You know, there are some banes and some boons that increase your fire damage. Whereas I don't recall there being anything in Arthurian for increasing like frost or other types of damage. It's mainly just you have an option to boost your fire damage. Do you think they're going to stick with that that sort of thing going into the launch of the game?
I do. I hope they do. I should say. I think they've painted a picture pretty well that the Arthurians have the Flame Mage, the Flame Warden, and therefore the TDD they've emphasized has a little bit of a lack of resistance to that naturally. But then the Vikings have the Moisture Mancer, the water, the Water Mage, and those Banes and Boons affect that more than anything. So we'll see hopefully very specific elements that are a little more realm oriented. I know not all realms will have all damage types.
Yeah.
I've asked that question before. Limitations on spell component or spell damage, the types of different damage they have. So we should see some focus on some of the realms.
Yeah. I'm kind of torn on it myself. I don't hate it. I am a little bit. I would like it if maybe there was like two possible focuses, you know, for some things like that. Like, okay, Arthurians, you can either get a boon to focus in fire damage or a boon to focus in lightning damage or something like that. Just so that, you know, the other realms can't say, all right, well, we're definitely resisting fire because we're going to go fight Arthurians, and that's going to screw them all over.
I would prefer a affinity to one element, but the option to have 2 or 3 more.
Grim slag. All right, so were there any other things y'all wanted to mention or bring up for this?
An interesting.
No, but you gave me the idea of asking about the character creation for crafters. I know we're not gonna get an answer because they probably haven't even started thinking about crafters.
Yeah, but it's a very valid question. How do those stats matter for crafters?
Yeah,
for the crafting process, rather.
Right.
Yeah, because that's what it's gonna impact on character creation is. If I want to be a blacksmith, do I have to invest in strength? Do I have to invest in agility, in dexterity, in what? If I want to enchant stuff, do the ears system? Do I have to add some arcane, or do I have to whatever?
Right. Do you have to have faith to be able to implement that or something like that? Yeah.
Yeah. So.
I do have 2 theoretical questions that are linked. The first is, do you guys think that the Death Curse and the Divine Intervention abilities sampled on the website for each class are going to make it into the game as part of choosing characters and like what class you want to be? Do you think that's going to, if they do make it into the game, if that's going to play any impact on what you choose?
In my case, no.
I definitely think it'll be in the game.
It should be, yes.
I kind of doubt it's going to impact people's class choices much because it is supposed to be a thing that rarely happens. So it's
exactly. It's that's the thing. That's why I said for me it's not going to impact it, because it's a small percentage chance on death that it's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a
Is that what
guaranteed.
they explain small percentage? I never have
I
ever
didn't.
heard
I
them
didn't.
mention it
I
would be a
believe it
small.
was they were saying, I don't remember exactly because it was at the reveal, so it was a while
I was
back.
under the impression it's when
but-
you die
but-
this happens.
No,
Yeah.
it's a percentage chance of it happening when you die,
Well, as I
and not a higher
recall,
one.
maybe one of them was, but I want to say one of them was supposed to be just a really powerful ability that has a very long cooldown. Like you could
Right.
use. I don't remember if
Yeah,
that.
but
I want to say that was the
not the
divine
death
intervention.
curses. Yeah,
The
not the
divine
death
intervention
curses.
was something like you could do,
Yeah, the divine
but
intervention was
like
something
once
on
a
a
day
very
or
long
something.
cooldown that you could do once in a very extreme thing. But
Yeah.
the death curse was supposed to be something that might happen upon death
Yeah. And
by a small percentage chance.
I'm
not
sure
a
it'll affect
guaranteed
some
every time.
people's, some people's decision making.
Yeah,
Somebody will look
probably.
at that and go, "That's cool. I want that," even though I can only do it like once every 3 hours.
Yeah,
I
it'll
don't think it'll
explode in
be
a
a
beer fountain.
huge factor for most people, just because.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, second question: if they do make it into the game, would you like to see multiple choices to pick and choose between a couple different divine interventions or death curses?
For me, since it's a minor factor, not necessarily, no.
I would like to see it. I wouldn't like to see it so much that I'm gonna, I would, but badger them about it or anything. It would be
Yeah,
something like if we could have 2 or 3 options for them, I'd
it
be
would be
like, that's
nice.
cool. That'd be nice. Or even if you could have it so that you could swap them out as you play the game and decide, all right, I want this one now instead of that one. Just, basically slotting it and going, kind of Diablo style. This is the thing I want now.
Yeah.
That would be cool. But ultimately, if they didn't make it in the game at all, honestly, I wouldn't care. I wouldn't care,
Yeah,
or
no.
I'd care like this much. Not
I
really
don't think
much.
many people
so.
would, from what I've seen. Talking about
I do think it's a
them.
cool idea. And so I like the idea of having them in game just because it could be kind of a cool thing, like a little thing that occasionally, rarely procs and hits people and is really cool. I like the idea of them, but if they weren't in game, I'm not going to cry over it. So
Yeah.
I all similarly would not cry if we only had one option per class and that was it.
Bad Lunar, I don't think that would be that would go over well with most people.
Do you guys feel that they are representing the correct amount of choice as far as like banes and boons for each class in the different things they're doing? How many like total banes and boons the class has up to this point that we've seen?
I'd like to see a few more than what we've seen.
Yeah, well,
what the
I'd
options
like
are
to
right
see.
now.
I'd like to see the same amount we had in the alpha, in the pre-alpha and alpha. That was twice
There were a lot of
we see
very generic ones back then,
Yeah.
but still a lot of them.
Yeah.
I do think that I actually wouldn't want to see like say double what we have now. I do think that there is such a thing as having too many banes and boons.
Yeah.
Because I think it's going to be, when they start adding a lot of those, it's going to get very difficult for them to make it so that you have to actually be balanced in your choice of banes and boons, and you have to make some hard choices and take some real penalties. When you have a lot of options for banes, there's going to be some banes that you're like, oh, of course I'll take that one.
Yeah, I
That
don't
one's
care
not
about
bad.
that one.
That's the
Yeah,
obvious.
there were a
min-max
few like
choice there.
that.
That's the
There were
min
a few
choice
like
of
that
your
that I
min-max.
was looking
Yeah.
at during the alpha. There were a few where I was like, I'll take that one. I don't
Yeah.
really care about that one, so I'll
That
take this
doesn't hurt
one.
me that bad at all.
Yeah, exactly.
I have
I
another
mean,
question.
I think if they did make a ton more options, they could possibly still balance it by making it so that when you take a bane or boon, you have to take a bane, you have to take a boon of equal point value. They could possibly balance it that way.
Yeah.
So
rather
instead
than
of being
have
able to go, okay, 3-point boon, and then I take a
yeah, and
2-point
three
and a
small
1-point
like
bane.
a 5 point boon and 5 small 1 point
Yeah,
bane
yeah.
to offset it. Yeah,
They could make it so
I,
that
I
no,
would be
if you
okay
take a
with that.
5-point boon, you
Yeah,
have to take a 5-point bane.
I would be
Deal
okay
with
with
it.
that. Yeah.
I could be okay with that because that would make it easier for them to balance it and make sure that if you
Mm,
take a really big
yeah,
boon, you have to
yeah,
take a
because
really big bane.
the more banes and boons you have, the harder it becomes to balance them.
True.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for those of you guys who are more PvP oriented, I know Kriss, you love your crafting.
I still enjoy PvP too.
No, you don't get
Typically,
to talk.
yeah, you can chime in on this. Typically, mobility in small group PvP is a huge thing.
Mhm.
Your ability to get around places, not just talking speed per se and running around, but just overall mobility. Do you think the agility stat or the stat that gives you more speed is going to play any factor in this slower combat environment that we're seeing and we're being told
Yeah,
is going to be happening?
Oh yeah.
I will
And how
say,
crucial is that for everyone to kind of like try to gravitate towards that a little bit?
as someone who has played a heavy fighter a lot in the beta, I can say that that's actually going to be probably one of the harder things for them to convey to new players, because they'll be like, and this will be mitigated somewhat by having big battles, but it'll still be a problem where new players are going to get in there and they're going to pick something like a heavy fighter and be like, oh, I don't need to be that fast, that's fine, and then they get in game and there's an archer that shoots them and runs double their speed and gets away from them and then shoots them and then runs double their speed. It just kites them around the map, and the whole time you're like, I'm trying to get to him. I can't get to him to hit him. And then you get killed by the archer one-on-one when you should be able to wipe the floor with him because you could never catch up to him. I'm not speaking from experience or anything. But yeah, so I think it'll still matter. It'll matter less in big group battles like sieges and everything, but ultimately, when you've got a group of archers or somebody kiting around you and shooting you, someone's got to go after them. And if you've
Yeah.
got heavy fighters, they've got to be able to catch up to them, or they're
There's
just gonna
nothing
die.
more infuriating. I haven't played tank enough to really know, but I've talked with enough tanks to know that there's nothing more infuriating than being kited by a range
Yeah.
that is just running around and you can't catch up to them.
Strike brings up an amendment to that, and that in this scenario, at least, agility isn't only key in that thing. That encumbrance reduction might also matter. How much do you see multiple stats working together to achieve the same effect, and how forced
Yeah.
do you think that might be if you are required to put points into two stats to get one overall effect?
Mm.
I do think that's one of the key reasons I think they should make an ability builder. I mean, a character builder, not an ability builder,
Yeah.
and a character builder in character creation, because I think it's important to be able to look at that and actively adjust those two numbers and see what happens when you
Mm-hmm.
tweak different things. That way,
Yeah.
you can really min max. So you look at it and go, okay, here's my health, here's my damage, here's my stamina, yada yada yada, and just start pushing buttons and see what happens to them. Because it is a lot harder to calculate. Well, even if we know the formulas, it's a lot harder to calculate once
Yeah.
two different things are affecting something. We go, okay, well, this increases my health by this amount times this amount based on this other stat. And then you've got people sitting there doing math. And let's face it, not all of us are good at math. Sure, we can go and get guides, but especially when the game first launches, those guides aren't going to necessarily exist or be up to date that well or be easily findable. I don't think it's realistic to expect that people are going to have to do the formulas themselves. So
No, well,
we're
older
not
players
we're not playing
might
spreadsheets
be okay.
online, okay?
Yeah, not anymore. It used to be the case because you had no tools for it. Now that there's tools existing for it, nobody, and we don't have time to do that anymore. I
Well,
know
yeah,
I
and
don't have
it's
time to spend 8 hours doing spreadsheets to see the effect of a small change in all stats.
yeah, and it's honestly not that difficult of a thing to put together. I mean, every major MMO has a website with this type of tool on it, on a web page where you can just go doop 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 and swap things in and out at your liberty. It would be pretty, but I don't know of any MMO that's actually built that into the game, and so that would be another way that they can kind of stand out a little bit and go, well, we're just providing it for you right here. Go ahead, have fun, do that thing.
Grimslag's
a
talking about.
lot of Eastern MMOs do that.
Yeah, I think Grimslag is talking about the ability to click a button and have it kind of pre-package a list of banes and boons, depending on your class, and not actually like a specialized shop.
That ties into what I said earlier, that with a pre-built like guideline for a starter pack, where you choose Archer and it spreads your stats and your banes and boons in one possible, not the optimal, because there's no optimal one, but in one more generic.
I think he's talking about stuff you actually buy.
Maybe.
Basically, yeah. Presets that you buy with character creation
points. Character creation points. Okay. I thought you were talking about with money.
Yeah.
I was like...
So like you sacrifice some stat points to then get a pre-package?
No, more like I want a Archer 10 boons points Archer pack. It's going to pick the boons and the banes to do that 10 points banes and boons.
It sounds too
Archer
complicated.
Catered to archers, basically.
It just sounds too complicated. The game already has a pretty complicated system. If you're having to then have the option to sacrifice points
for the player, it's not complicated because you pick Archer, like Archer Banes and Boons pack. It distributes your points as the pack is set up.
But when you choose the Archer class, you already are limited to Archer only Banes and Boons.
Yeah.
So.
Well,
like
I don't mean complicated for the player. I mean complicated for them to balance in the game. Because that's them one whole other category of stuff. Especially if they have abilities that only they have access to. That's going to be a whole other range of stuff they have to balance. And I just don't know that it's necessary. I mean, what do we gain from doing that instead of just letting them allocate them to attributes? I don't know. And I don't like the idea of someone else having a skill that I can't ever use as an archer, and then like this other archer has an ability that they can use that I can't use. I don't like that either.
And Badlander, I hope, even as a crafter, I hope gear cannot offset your stats choice, because then that negates the character creation choices.
Now, Grimslag, if you're talking about just a preset, like you have an option, you click an archer, and then you can go, okay, DPS, glass cannon DPS archer, or balanced archer, or highly mobile archer. I'm totally in favor of them including some presets like that. They don't take away your points. It just kind of distributes them and goes, okay, if you want to quit, that's what I was mentioning earlier with quick builds. If they wanted to put in some quick builds so that you could click it and it just lays out the points for you, and it's like, this is what we recommend you do. Now you can do whatever the hell you want, but here's a recommendation for a glass cannon DPS archer. I'd be cool with that. In fact, I think that's actually something that they really should include in some capacity.
Yeah, I agree.
To help avoid people making really crappy characters. The people who aren't going to do research.
That's their problem. I have no sympathy for people who didn't research their build prior to character creation and then start complaining that their character is gimped because they didn't make the right choice. They didn't know that this stat would do that.
Mm-hmm.
You will have all the informations on the hand.
I have sympathy depending on how the character creation works and what's in the character creation. If they throw a hot mess of character creation with
Yes, of
Not
course.
very useful or intelligible information on the screen, and people, or you can't tell what your character actually plays like before you get in
Mhm.
and play them up to, for the first month.
Yeah. No, of course.
Then I'm going to be
Because
like, no,
again,
they just screwed
Right.
up on character creation.
To that extent, though, there's only so much time they can invest into helping people get used to what this game
yeah.
is
Yeah.
when they have to make the game, that I can see them just doing the simplest thing just to get the point across.
But
And
but we have to be real that, that is a part of their job. For
that's true.
creating the game, and that is
Yes.
in some MMOs that has been a major deterrent from people adopting the game. You get in the game and you have no idea what's going on. You don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Different. It's not even
I know
necessarily a
character
matter of making a
creation
character that
is the first
sucks,
gate to entry.
but you start going into
Character
there and
creation.
you're just like, I'm lost and I'm confused and this isn't fun and the intro tutorial sucks.
Yeah.
And you just log in.
Yeah.
I've had games where I've logged in and started through the intro tutorial, just said this sucks, and just logged out and never played it again. And
It is,
then I've had games like the Elder Scrolls Online where I made a character that at character creation looked really feasible and cool. And I picked abilities that looked really useful and interesting and feasible. And then I got into the game and I found out that because of how the game worked with its lag, my character was not very feasible at all. Not
Yeah.
necessarily because of how the damage worked out, but mostly because of how
Because
the
of the lag.
PvP lagged, and I couldn't really use
Yeah.
anything because I was going on like an auto fire bow spec, and I could hardly ever tell if my bow was even firing.
Yeah. Sadly, that's also a problem of some games.
Yeah, it is crucial to retain your players interested in the game and to provide them with the means to enjoy getting in and making the character, but they can only do so much too.
The
So
early experience is pretty important.
yeah,
I'm okay with a character creation that is extremely in depth in terms of stats and of choices to make. But you should provide the option for the people who don't want to spend the time to do that to have a decent pre-built archetype kind of that they can just click like in 4 or 5 clicks and then start the game.
I think another thing that they can do to help with this, which again to some extent only helps with the people that do research, but I
Yeah.
think it would help not necessarily it would help the people who don't want to do a lot of research, so they just want to do a little bit of research, more the modern MMO player a little bit, and that is they can make character templates, but they can make like character template videos. They can put out a series of videos like, all right, we're doing an Archer series. These are the different
somebody's
ways.
going to do it.
These are the different ways. Yeah, but they can't. They can't wait till 6 months after the game's
Yeah.
launched to have somebody
it.
do this. So they could put out a series of these are different. Kind of like a lot of MOBAs do when they release new characters. They'll show you a little video of, hey, this is how the character works. He does this ability and yada yada, or Overwatch or anything like that. They could have a short little 3-minute clip of here's a mobility archer we made, and this is how he works in combat. And they just run him around for 3 minutes using different abilities. They talk about a few of the abilities in a video, put it out. And do that for not every possible combination, just some examples of this is what you're looking at playing like when you get in the game with this type of character. You can either do this type of archer, this type of archer, or this type of archer. You can do other things you want, but this is what we're showing you.
Not an in-depth explanation, but
Or it could just be a single, this is the archer, and then it flips through a couple different options of different ways they've styled and made the archer. Here's one that's more mobile and it shoots and does this stuff, and here's one that does lots of AoE arrow attacks, and
for more
and
in-depth
that's just
stuff, there will
marketing
be
as well.
guides, player made video guides, Twitch streamers, YouTube guides, etc.
For sure.
Yeah.
I just think the problem is that I think when a game launches is the time when they're going to get the most new players.
Yes.
When it launches or when they release new content. After it launches, if the launch experience is bad or people don't understand what they're doing or what they're going to do, or they log in the game and their faction starts in this giant, boring, frozen waste that's really empty, they're just going to log out and they're not going to want to keep playing. They're going to lose people from that. And I think there are some things that they could do to minimize that and maybe increase marketing at the same time.
Yeah.
at any rate, we have now been going for like an hour and a half. So I think this is a pretty good place to stop. I want to
Indeed.
thank
Yeah.
everybody for joining us for episode 69 of the Unchained Vodcast, making a character. Next episode, which will be in 2 weeks, we're going to try and have a interview maybe.
Yeah, we'll see about that.
hopefully.
We'll see if that works out. If not, we will
Yep.
choose another topic and let you know. But thanks, everybody. And if you're watching this
thanks for
recording later
coming.
on, look forward to more in the future.
Indeed.